It's really heartening to see everyone attending the conference with such vigor. And just before we start the proceedings of this panel, I just want to take some time to thank all our partners, all our friends, all our supporters, without which, hosting this every year for the last 4 years now, if I'm not mistaken, would not be possible. So really, thank you so much for the fellowship and the goodwill and the friendship. We really do appreciate it. So, democratization of self-insurance. We've been asked this time and time again, what does this mean? And really, if you take one step back and think about captives, self-insurance, and realize that, this was the toolkit for lots of multinational companies, the largest of the large. And now what we're talking about is really democratizing it, making it available for everyone, specifically via cell captives. So the idea of this conversation that I'm going to have with these three lovely gentlemen is about cell captives. It's about the benefits of using self captives, where we are in the evolution in Asia specifically. How are they different? I mean, a lot of people know that Labuan is Asia's only protected cell company jurisdiction, but a lot of people don't realize there's also this thing called master rent-a-captive and subsidiary rent-a-captive, and Steve's going to talk us through the intricacies of that in a minute. But before that, gentlemen, thank you for joining this panel. We really do appreciate your contribution, as always. Tell me, how are cells different in nature and ethos vis-a-vis a pure captive? I mean, a lot has been said about this, right? Captives being a strategic, holistic risk management system. And then I think I was on a panel with Steve Tunstall of Parima, who went, oh, it's like a Band-Aid, is it? It's just a quick slap on. Thoughts, please. Maybe we'll start with Ollie or Graham or Stephen, anyone. Just let's pitch in and have a conversation about this, shall we?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think the difference in nature and ethos between the cell and a pure captive comes down to the reasons why people are looking to use that particular vehicle. Certainly, we very much see clients that are interested in cell falling into a category whereby they are looking to dip their toes into the water of a more formalized approach to self-insurance. They may typically be a smaller enterprise, an SME or a mid-market company, and they may be looking to place one or two lines within that cell company, and often they don't necessarily have a formalized risk management process or risk management team within the organization themselves. The flip side to that would be those looking for a full captive would have a more advanced risk management function, perhaps a CRO or a risk manager. They'd be looking to perhaps put multiple lines of cover into the vehicle from day one. They might be a multinational rather than a mononational business, so operating on a global scale. But there are some companies that will look at both, and I know that we're going to cover that off in a few moments.
I think that's an interesting intro, Ollie. I think this session about democratization of self-insurance. It's not just about that. It's coming in parallel to the whole democratization of the individual and the corporate. So if you look compared to when the captive industry started, the unparalleled access that you have now as a buyer to information, to risk management, to modeling, to community communications, to everything really empowers. And what this does is it sort of empowers not just the buyer in terms of options, but it's the whole ecosystem beneath that of all the providers and all the suppliers that make this work. So I think that one of the great things is, I think the timing is, this is an idea whose time has now come. And I think the PCC particularly is a good example of that. But I think that if anything else, where I'm speaking from Tokyo, where business and corporates are naturally cautious and conservative. And I think that one of the great things that the PCC and the captive Labuan jurisdiction is able to do is to enable companies to sort of put their toe in the water and to start to do things slowly. So the flexibility that gives wasn't there in the early days. So I think this is a huge plus, and also an encouragement to get people to start the journey.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would just add that, also we, as an industry, we're moving towards platforms more and more. and technologies enabling that in a way that it simply hasn't in the last 20 years or so. And a lot of these use cases and the models that we'll see in a moment, they can really be enabled by the technology and make the whole ecosystem, as Graham was talking about, much more accessible to more businesses who otherwise would have been locked out of the system previously.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, my pipe dream is to, welcome Asia's first digital captive to Labuan, actually, because I see that there's so much economies of scale to be had via platforming, via the wholesale, accessing the wholesale market. The element of digitalization just really changes, and Graham's completely spot on, really changes the whole ecosystem surrounding a captive and the management of a captive, really. And then when you slap on an AI solution vis-a-vis an underwriting element, even more so. But I know, Steve, there are a lot of different types of cells. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. There are cells and then there are cells. So, could you kind of walk us through the different types of cell structures and the differences there?
Yeah, like Blue Peter, if anybody has seen it,
Yes.
they would have known there was one I made. And funnily enough, I do have some slides which I made earlier.
Oh wow, there you go.
So maybe we can flick to the second slide here, because that's just about me. Now, what I'm trying to do here, this is not necessarily a few slides about different types of cell structure. There are a few slides about the different use cases that the various types of legal entity that Labuan makes available can be used for. Okay, so it's more which use case we use, which kind of structure we use is much more geared towards, as Oliver just mentioned, the business model. So it's a case of deciding first, what's your business model, and then going and finding the right sort of structure to go with that. So what I've done with these next few slides is tried to color code them. To simplify them. They are conceptual slides. So, purists looking in would probably say, oh, well, we can vary this and we can vary that. Of course you can. All of these slides are really simplified, and you can take them from that simple basic concept and vary them according to the ingenuity of your lawyers or the ingenuity of your tax accountants, depending upon what the business model. So what you see here is a very simplified structure, not necessarily all the variations that you can necessarily find. So what I've shown here for a traditional or pure captive is the parent subsidiary model. Very traditional, not necessarily limited to the captive context by any stretch of the imagination. We use this particular structure day in, day out in all sorts of contexts, but it's here and it's available within the captive sort of environment. The captive is a subsidiary of the parent, so it has its own separate legal personality. We might touch on that later. It holds its license, the captive holds the license, and it can be separately capitalized. It can be bankruptcy remote. So let's move to the next slide. And Farah, you were mentioning renter captives. Now, again, we see the same color coding. We've got a parent subsidiary relationship, but it's a little bit more complicated than the previous slide because there's more things going on in there. Now, what we've got here is probably something for the less sophisticated users of the world who may not have the skills necessary to run their own captives. So they want to use the parent who really provides almost a shared services model to enable the captive subsidiary to be accessed by those for whom it would otherwise be out of reach. And then the whole arrangement is governed by a rental agreement. And that I've put in, 5 lessees down the bottom, you can call them what you like. You could just replicate that right along the slide, and you could have 20, you could have 50, you could have 100 in there. All exactly the same kind of setup conceptually, but all enabled by this company at the top, the parent, providing all the services to enable a captive to be run properly. So that's rental captives. Maybe we can go to the next slide. And this again, same color coding. You've got the captive at the bottom, which is may or may not be a subsidiary of part owners. Okay, and each of those owners owns a share in the subsidiary. Now, those owners might share an affinity. Perhaps they're in the same industry as each other. Or they might be part of the same group of companies and therefore have the same interest in accessing a captive. But again, it's still that same parent subsidiary model that we've adapted and we've varied according to the use case. And then we have on our last slide something which looks very different to what we've seen before. And this is the Pcc structure. It's the one that gets all the news. It's the sexy one amongst all of the variants that I've shown in the previous slides. And it's the one people naturally gravitate to, and perhaps there's some mystery behind. I think the main difference with the Pcc structure is that it's a separate creature created by the Labuan Companies Act, and it creates these cells within a corporate Pcc structure. The cells operate like mini captives, if you like, but I suppose the main difference between this slide and all the others is that those cells don't have a separate personality, legal personality of their own. The Pcc has the separate legal personality, not the cells themselves, although the Labuan Companies Act allows the cells to own their own assets and have their own liabilities. So that's a thumbnail sketch between the various options that are available. And maybe we'll talk about some of the use cases where one use case is more adaptive or more appropriate to the business model than others.
Yeah, so this is where I like to bring Ollie in, and from your experience, Ollie, what type of user will use what type of, it's horses for courses, clearly. And these are not off-the-shelf solutions, clearly. But what type of user would use what kind of captive? What kind of user will use a cell? And could it even be plausible that someone who already owns a pure captive would then take on a cell?
Yes, so from a high-level perspective to start with, what we're finding and what we've seen over the years is that the organizations that would go straight for full captive are the ones that probably have a risk manager in place. They probably have a multi-territory operational platform, and they're therefore looking for a global program. They probably are a more sophisticated buyer in that they've had relationships with not just the local insurance market, but the international reinsurance market, the professional providers of the capacity. And they're probably looking at having 2 or more lines of cover that they want to put into their self-insurance vehicle. The opposite to that would be the cell, where most of our cell clients don't actually have a risk manager. It's the whole of the insurance buying process is run through the finance department, the CFO and the CEO. They might only be looking to put 1 or 2 lines of risk into their captive. And they have a lower budget to spend on the operational costs and the establishment costs of the vehicle. That's a very high level overview, because there are always going to be anomalies within that. We do have clients that have full captives that have also set up a cell captive. And they've done that for a variety of reasons. The first reason would be because they are an acquisitive organization, and every time they buy a new firm, they don't want to automatically roll that firm into their mainstream corporate insurance program in their captive. And that's partly because they may not necessarily understand the full long tail liabilities that might attach to that particular entity, and they want to be able to clean it, clean that loss record over the following 2 or 3 years before introducing it to the main program. Another use would be where an organization is expanding into a new product line, and they want to make sure that any issues that are associated with that particular product are, again, ring-fenced from their main P&L of their captive. We've also seen cases where entities simply cannot get insurance in the market at any price anymore. Excuse me, at any price anymore. And they've decided that they think it's a very profitable piece of business. They want to keep it, again, ring-fenced from the rest of their corporate business, and to be able to build a track record in that space so that when the market comes back again, they can prove and show, here's what we've been doing for the last 5 years. We've got a very profitable book of business. Would you now like to participate in providing excess reinsurance, whatever it might be? So there are a number of different reasons why people would have both. But I think it's fair to say that certainly what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is that those companies going for the sell rather than the pure captive are the ones that have expectations of lower operational costs, lower establishment costs, single line, maybe 2 lines of cover, and are not necessarily a risk-managed organization. They are a mid-market SME, but still have very identifiable needs to be able to go into the non-traditional insurance market.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how a pure captive owner will almost sanitize the risk before bringing it on book into the pure via a sell. That's quite interesting, actually, that idea of it. And of course, what you've said with regards to the SME, just echoes the title of this conference, the democratization of it. Now everyone can have a captive, for example. Now, Graham, unbeknown to many, you actually own a commercial PCC provider in Labuan.
We do.
Tell us, what has been the uptake in Japan, the Asian market? Tell us what your experience has been so far.
Yes, we primarily did this for Japan when we started, and it's been sort of the culmination of, I guess, a 3 or 4 year journey. Initially starting with workshops and seminars, sort of testing water, testing reaction. We are working in quite a unique market up here in Japan. It is extremely conservative and risk averse, both corporate and obviously insurance company. I think that as this has developed, the whole captive domicile question initially was rather unsettling because it was looked at as slightly suspect and possibly unstable. And lack of stability is something which is a big corporate no-no in Japan. So it took a while for it to begin to take hold. The other reason was that this is a company, a market dominated by 4 major insurers. And that concentration of risk has had positive and negative effects. But for the insurers, the positive is there's extremely good and effective market control. A lot of the corporates here have tied agencies, and many of those agencies are staffed by people from the insurance companies. So there's very little in the way of innovation and design that's gone through that has prompted change. And of course, there's almost no brokers. The brokers that are here are primarily servicing the multinational accounts. So that kind of environment was not conducive, I think, initially to promoting captives, but also alternative risk transfer. That's changing, or that has changed. It's changed for a number of reasons. As the insurance companies have consolidated, they've become more risk averse in terms of product, and their response time on what I call need product, stuff where situations or risks have emerged that need addressing quickly, COVID, cyber, those kind of things, they're not getting the responses they need. This pushes them in the direction of looking for alternates. You've also got the consolidation risk that the insurance companies had in terms of providing catastrophe cover, because the concentration of risk is so high that the capacity tends to go to the bigger corporate buyers, understandably. and because they pay more. So there's whole swathes of society here that don't have the basic access to protection in terms of catastrophe protection. So we see this as an avenue, and one to which we've had very good response as we've started to develop. The other thing is digital has widened the access to information. The promotion of Labuan, but other captive domiciles, and the kind of tools that are available to risk managers. A lot of the corporates and those that have had large losses overseas, outside Japan, are now aware that coverage structure outside Japan is different. So they then become more attuned as buyers to what they can do. So these are the kind of things that we found that are changing. And I think we found now mid-level companies, people in automotive business, Thai companies in railway and infrastructure, looking at this kind of solution now, really for the flexibility it gives. Being able to start something in a relatively cost-effective way and building. For a nation that's risk-averse, this is a very attractive proposition.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to think that cat cover in a country like Japan must be even harder now than it was before. No,
it's finite.
Yeah, it's quite shocking. We have I want to try and be a bit interactive here. So we've got a question from Andy who said, can a pure convert into a PC, a pure captive convert into PC? Absolutely, that is possible. But like Stephen was saying earlier, there are obviously separate legal entities, so it would require a fresh application. Having said that, obviously the regulator would have some kind of underwriting track record and information, so it might be easier. Well, I expect it to be easier anyway, don't quote me, but yes, it is a separate application, but absolutely possible. And then we have a question from Dom as well, and it says, can the panel please comment on the differing governance control that applies for users of cells as opposed to subcaps? And how does this affect the flexibility of cell captives to develop as a strategic tool? Stephen, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll have a crack at that. But just to comment on something on the first question as well. It's important to remember that the subsidiary, which is the pure traditional captive that would be used, and the PCC are two corporate entities created by the Labuan Companies Act, right? So the Labuan Companies Act creates some requirements for a PCC, but at its heart, it's still a corporate entity, right? And you can adapt one into the other and vice versa. What I usually say to this is, the answer is yes. Now, what's the question? Frankly, this is so flexible, you can pretty much do anything you like, obviously within the rules, but you need creativity and you need some imagination in order to get it done. On the second question, the way that I would describe this is that the matrix between the various cells within the PCC is almost like a shareholders agreement. Now, with a shareholders agreement, you can pretty much do anything you like. You can regulate anything you want within reason, as long as everybody agrees. And there's a huge amount of flexibility to achieve, as between the various shareholders, what your overall outcome is. I don't see any difference with that kind of matrix agreement between the various owners, contributors of the cells. So provided everybody can agree, and you've got these sort of constitutional documents that regulate the activities of the cells and keep them, operating in an orderly fashion, there's no reason why you can't adapt that from time to time to suit changing circumstances.
Sorry, just out of my own curiosity, would that be then the same SA for all cells vis-a-vis the mothership core? Or, would you have that flexibility to have different kinds of governance structures vis-a-vis the core, depending on that cell? I mean...
Yeah, well, in true lawyer fashion, I'll say maybe.
Okay, well done.
It really depends upon what the business case was for that PCC at the start as to how it needs to be bent and shaped according to the varying circumstances. And so, the answer to your question won't always be the same for each PCC because it already depends upon the business model and the cells that are being occupied within the PCC already.
Well, Dom, I hope we answered your questions. We've got 5 minutes left, and I really want to talk about something that's very close to my heart, which is financial inclusion. And I wanted to ask Graham a little bit about, so aside from owning a commercial PCC, Graham's also using Labuan and a Labuan PCC, or a Labuan cell, I should say, to be specific, for financial inclusion project in Indonesia. Graham, do you want to talk us through that? Because I think, one of the things, before you go ahead, I just want to say a couple of things. Number one, the PCC in Labuan is not just for self-insurance, it's for funds as well. It is a corporate vehicle where self-insurance is allowed. And, we have a similar structure. There are similar structures across the world where insurance is not allowed to be used depending on the jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions like Labuan obviously are extremely flexible. We allow for wealth management funds to be part of it. Some people use it for family offices, for example, and then you can use it for self-insurance as well. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And the second thing is, I think the idea of having separate cells but being governed by a core, and in a way through that shareholders agreement that Stephen was talking about, the management of which can be quite restrictive or non-restrictive, depending on how you want to structure. It's all in the drafting, isn't it, Stephen? So, Graham, let's talk a little bit about this fantastic initiative that you're having with some Indonesian seaweed farmers, I believe.
Financial inclusion is a core pillar of our business. And by financial inclusion, I don't necessarily mean selling policies to the unbanked. I mean about what builds resilience with communities and makes them sustainable. This is about growth and making community impact. The initiative we have running in Indonesia really came out of a concept and is geared of two things. One is, this is the two primary issues that are facing today for our generation, our children and our grandchildren, which is food security and climate. Our seaweed initiative in Indonesia, and there is a very strong reason why it will come back to sales in a minute, is about building coastal resilience and coastal protection for fishing communities, is a way of building resilience and long-term income. We have a short video that we'd like to show you, which encapsulates, rather than listening to me talking, which will show you what we're doing in Indonesia.
Well, yes, but we've got 2 minutes on the clock, and I think Scott and his guys at MBES were absolutely aboard the fact that we've taken over their time. So what we'll do is we'll send everyone a link to that video. That's but fine. If you want to talk us through this will be fantastic, Graham.
Yes, it is. And what we've done with this, there's two parts of our business, but we're doing is community resilience model. And what we've done with this is being able to take seaweed and farming, and through the structures we've done with Labuan, we are protecting the farmers. Every time they sell a kilo of seaweed, their insurance protections are all built in. Everything flows through from there, automated, mobile, online, underpinned by blockchain. And so all the primary catastrophe protection is all done for the farmers, and it's paid for by the people who are using the seaweed, the processors, and you and me every time we have a piece of food or a glass of beer, because everything has got seaweed in it in terms of food preservative. The structure in Labuan enables that to take place, not just for the personal lines, but also the corporate. We're talking about one of the world's fastest growing new commodities in seaweed. So I think that's it's a very important initiative for us. And it's an important part of what we see as the financial community's response to climate, which is a commitment that was made in Glasgow for over $1 trillion of capital.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to see, for us at Labuan IBFC to be part of something so important, something that, is now front and center, and that regardless of, how we can influence it, we should, right, in any way, shape or form, encourage it.
Right.
The idea that a jurisdiction, a wholesale jurisdiction like Labuan can play its part in facilitating inclusion, creating some kind of a social safety net, is fantastic. So thank you, gentlemen. As always, it's such a pleasure chatting with you. We could go on and on, but we've got 3 seconds left. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.